The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within hours of humanity's victory at Xerion. Veltar had never seen the Great Chamber so tense. Representatives who had ruled the galaxy for millennia now whispered among themselves like frightened children. The holographic displays that usually showed trade routes and territorial boundaries now displayed tactical analyses of the human victory, played over and over as if repetition might make the impossible seem reasonable. War Captain Thakron stood in the center of the chamber, his red scales pale with shock and humiliation. His report was brief and devastating. 18 minutes, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Our finest commanders, our most advanced ships, our proven tactics. Defeated in 18 minutes by 30 human vessels. High Merchant Ziltek shifted nervously on his platform. Surely there's an explanation. Some kind of technological advantage we didn't account for? Their ships are still primitive by our standards, Thakron replied. Their weapons are simple projectile and energy systems. Nothing we haven't seen before. Then how? Demanded Elder Kothara of the Ethereals. Her usually calm demeanor had cracked, revealing ancient fears beneath her composed surface. Veltar found himself called forward to present his analysis. He had spent the past 3 days reviewing every second of recorded data from the exercise, and what he had discovered made his scales itch with nervous energy. Honored council members, he began. The humans didn't win through superior technology. They won through superior thinking. He activated the chamber's main display, showing a 3-dimensional map of the asteroid field during the battle. They calculated the gravitational effects of their explosions months in advance. Every asteroid movement, every collision, every trajectory was planned before they ever entered the system. They didn't just fight in the environment. They redesigned the environment to fight for them. Impossible, Ziltax protested. The computational requirements alone would demand resources no single species possesses. That's what I thought too, Veltar admitted. Until I accessed their public scientific databases. They've been doing these calculations since they first reached space. Every human spacecraft uses gravitational modeling for navigation. It's as basic to them as breathing. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. There's more, Veltar continued, knowing that what he was about to say would terrify them even further. I intercepted communications from their home system during the exercises. This victory wasn't planned by their military command. It was a training exercise created by their Naval Academy students. Students? Thakron's voice cracked slightly. Their finest military minds are currently engaged in different planning exercises, war games involving full-scale galactic conflict scenarios. The silence stretched until it became painful. What kind of scenarios? Kothara asked, though her tone suggested she didn't want to know the answer. Veltar activated another display, showing intercepted data fragments that his intelligence team had managed to decode. Operation Bright Dawn. Complete invasion of the Draknari. Empire using converted civilian transport ships and asteroid-based kinetic weapons. Estimated timeline 6 months. Thakron made a strangled noise. Operation Economic Storm. Systematic disruption of hegemony trade networks through coordinated attacks on key shipping nodes. Estimated timeline 3 months. Ziltax's forearms began trembling. Operation Ancient Memory. Siege of ethereal core worlds using psychological warfare and cultural manipulation tactics. Estimated timeline 1 year. Kothara's glowing eyes dimmed to barely visible flickers. And these are just the scenarios they're willing to discuss on partially secured channels. Veltar continued. I can only imagine what they're planning in complete secrecy. The chamber erupted in panicked voices as representatives from dozens of species began talking at once. Some demanded immediate military action against Earth. Others called for economic sanctions. A few suggested opening diplomatic negotiations. Through the chaos, a new voice cut through the noise like a blade through paper. Excuse me, but may I address the council? Every head turned toward the chamber's main entrance. Admiral Jin Ho of the human fleet stood in the doorway, flanked by General Kyung Ho and Strategic Coordinator Min Su. They had arrived unannounced and unescorted, which should have been impossible given the station's security systems. How did you get here? Thakron demanded. Jin Ho smiled politely. We received intelligence that the council was discussing humanity's future. We thought it would be appropriate to participate in the conversation. This is a closed session, Ziltax protested. No outside observers are permitted. Of course, Jinho agreed. We're not here as observers. We're here as participants. He walked to the center of the chamber with calm confidence, his officers flanking him in perfect formation. We know what you're discussing, General Kyung-ho said, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. You're trying to decide whether to attack us before we become too dangerous. We're trying to determine the best course of action for galactic stability. Kothara replied carefully. Stability, Minsu repeated thoughtfully. An interesting concept. You've maintained stability for thousands of years through the threat of overwhelming force. Fear has been your primary tool of government. It has prevented wars, Thakron argued. No, Jinho corrected gently. It has prevented fair wars. You've used superior technology and numbers to crush anyone who might challenge your authority, but you've never faced an opponent who could match your capabilities. He gestured to the tactical displays still showing humanity's victory at Zerion. Until now. The chamber fell silent again. Veltar noticed that the human officers weren't making threats. They were simply stating facts. Somehow that made them even more frightening. What do you want? Ziltax asked finally. Peace, Jinho replied immediately. But real peace. Not the artificial stability you've maintained through intimidation. What kind of peace? Kothara's voice was barely a whisper. Minsu stepped forward, activating a portable holographic projector. New displays appeared throughout the chamber, showing star charts marked with shipping routes, military positions, and resource distribution. We propose a new model for galactic governance, she said. One based on mutual cooperation rather than military dominance. Impossible, Thakron scoffed. Every species seeks advantage over its neighbors. It's the nature of intelligent life, is it? Kyung-ho asked. Or is it simply the nature of the system you've created? The displays changed, showing economic data and resource flows. The current galactic economy is based on artificial scarcity and controlled conflict, Minsu continued. You maintain high prices for essential goods by limiting access to resources. You justify massive military expenditures by keeping border disputes active. Everyone stays dependent on the Council for protection and trade. This has ensured prosperity for all member species, Ziltax argued. For the ruling classes of member species, Jinho corrected. But we've analyzed your economic data. Most citizens of Council worlds live in relative poverty, while their governments spend fortunes on weapons they hope never to use. What alternative do you propose? Kothara asked. The displays changed again, showing new trade routes and resource allocation plans. Open access to interstellar shipping, shared technology development, cooperative resource extraction, democratic representation based on population rather than military strength. Chaos, Thakron declared. Without central authority, the galaxy would tear itself apart. Would it? Kyung-ho's smile was sharp. Or would species finally have the chance to solve their own problems instead of relying on outside arbitrators with their own agendas? Jinho looked around the chamber, making eye contact with each council member. We're not here to threaten you, he said quietly. We're here to offer you a choice. You can continue trying to maintain the old system through force, knowing that we have the capability to defend ourselves and our allies. Or you can work with us to build something better. And if we refuse? Thakron asked. The silence stretched for several heartbeats before Minsu answered. Then, you'll discover what happens when an unstoppable force meets a movable object. She deactivated the holographic displays, leaving the chamber in relative darkness. The choice is yours, Jinho said as the human delegation turned toward the exit. But I suggest you choose quickly. Our patience has limits and our students are getting bored with their current assignments. They walked out of the chamber in perfect formation, leaving behind a room full of very worried alien leaders. Veltar remained at his position, watching the council members as they struggled to process what had just happened. For the first time in galactic history, someone had offered them a choice between cooperation and conflict. And everyone in the chamber knew that humanity was perfectly capable of making either option work. The age of human dominance hadn't begun with conquest or invasion. It had begun with a simple question. What if there was a better way? Now the galaxy would find out if anyone was brave enough to try answering it. The Zerion system had become the center of galactic attention. Veltar stood on the observation deck of the neutral monitoring station, watching hundreds of ships take their positions throughout the asteroid field. News crews from a dozen species transmitted live feeds across the galaxy. Military academies suspended classes so students could watch the exercises. This was meant to be humanity's final lesson in galactic realities. War Captain Thakron commanded the combined assault force from his flagship, a massive Draknari dreadnought that dwarfed everything else in the system. Around him, ships from 11 other species formed attack formations that had been tested in hundreds of battles over thousands of years. Exercise parameters are confirmed, announced the neutral referee, a crystalline entity whose mathematical mind was considered perfectly impartial. Human forces will defend Installation Zerion 7 against all attacking forces. Exercise begins in 10 minutes. Admiral So Young's fleet looked impossibly small against the assembled might of the Council forces. 30 human ships formed a loose defensive perimeter around a small mining station, built on one of the larger asteroids. To galactic observers, it looked like a doomed last stand. Colonel Dayun stood beside So Young on the human flagship's bridge. Her expression was calm, almost serene. "All teams report ready, Admiral." "Gravitational calculations confirmed," reported Major Yunji from the science station. "Timing sequence is locked in." Captain Hyunwoo smiled from the engineering console. "Mining charges are in position. Remote detonation systems show green across the board." Veltar leaned forward against the observation deck window. "Mining charges? What were the humans planning to mine during a military exercise?" "Begin exercise," announced the crystalline referee. Thakron's voice boomed across all communication channels. "Attention, human forces. You are outnumbered 12 to 1. Surrender now and avoid unnecessary destruction of your ships." So Young's reply was polite and professional. "Thank you for the offer, War Captain. We respectfully decline." The Council fleet began its advance. Draknari heavy cruisers led the assault, their massive weapons charging with visible energy. Hegemony carrier groups launched fighter squadrons that darkened space with their numbers. Ethereal battleships moved with ancient grace, their weapon systems humming with power that could shatter planets. The human response seemed almost casual. Their ships spread out, moving deeper into the asteroid field rather than forming a solid defensive line. To experienced galactic commanders, it looked like a rookie mistake. The humans were giving up their concentrated firepower advantage and making themselves vulnerable to being picked off one by one. "First contact in 30 seconds, reported Commander Namsik from his tactical station. "All units, execute pattern alpha," So Young ordered calmly. What happened next took exactly 4 seconds. Across the asteroid field, precisely placed mining charges detonated simultaneously, not on the asteroids themselves but in carefully calculated positions that would alter their gravitational relationships without causing visible damage. The explosions were small, barely noticeable against the vast scale of space, but the effects were immediate and devastating. A Draknari heavy cruiser, moving confidently through what its sensors showed as open space, suddenly found itself in the path of a slowly tumbling asteroid the size of a small moon. The ship's emergency maneuvering systems activated, throwing it into a desperate evasive turn that brought it directly into the weapons range of 3 human ships that had been waiting in its new trajectory. The cruiser's shields failed in 12 seconds across the asteroid field. Similar scenes played out simultaneously. Hegemony fighters found their attack formations scattered as asteroids shifted into their flight paths. Ethereal battleships moving in the precise formations their ancient tactical doctrine demanded discovered that space itself had been rearranged around them. "Impossible," breathed Thakron over the communication channels. "They're moving the asteroids." "Negative," replied the crystalline referee after running rapid calculations. "Exercise rules prohibit damage to asteroid surfaces. All asteroids remain intact. Gravitational alterations are within acceptable parameters." Captain Miran's voice came through the human communication network, calm and professional. "Phase 2 initiation in 3, 2, 1. Mark." The second wave of detonations was larger. This time, the charges had been placed to accelerate asteroids along carefully planned trajectories. What had been a relatively stable asteroid field became a 3-dimensional maze of moving obstacles, each one following paths that the humans had calculated weeks in advance. But the asteroids weren't just obstacles. They were weapons. A hegemony carrier, trying to maneuver around what it thought was a stationary asteroid, found itself caught between two massive rocks moving toward each other in a precisely timed collision. The ship's only escape route led directly into a crossfire zone where 4 human vessels were waiting. Lieutenant Commander Jiwoo's intelligence work proved its value as human forces anticipated every move the Council commanders made. The psychological profile she had compiled allowed the humans to predict how each species would react to unexpected situations. Draknari commanders faced with chaotic conditions would try to force their way through with brute strength. Hegemony officers would look for ways to minimize losses and preserve their equipment. Ethereal captains would fall back on ancient protocols that had worked for millennia. The humans had prepared for all of it. "This is War Captain Thakron to all units," came the increasingly desperate voice over Council communications. "Reform at Rally Point 7. Ignore the asteroids and concentrate fire on human positions." But there were no fixed human positions. Admiral Young-ho's fleet moved through the chaos like they had built it themselves, which in a sense they had. Every asteroid's trajectory, every gravitational interaction, every collision point had been calculated and planned. Commander Jae-sung led his squadron through a gap between 2 asteroids that closed seconds after his ships passed through. The Council vessels following him were forced to break off or be crushed between moving rocks. Major Dong-wook used the asteroid movements to mask his ship's approach until he was close enough to disable a hegemony command vessel with precise strikes on its communication, array and engine systems. Captain Subin's engineers had calculated the positions so perfectly that her ships could use asteroid gravity wells to slingshot around obstacles, gaining speed while Council forces struggled to maintain stable flight paths. Veltar watched in stunned amazement as the largest military fleet ever, assembled by the Galactic Council, was systematically taken apart by a force 1/12 its size. The humans weren't just winning. They were dominating so completely that it looked effortless. "Admiral," reported Namsik, "Council forces are down 60%. Remaining ships are in full retreat." Veltar checked the chronometer. The exercise had been running for exactly 17 minutes. "This is Thakron to all Council forces," came the war captain's voice, now stripped of its earlier confidence. "Tactical withdrawal to minimum safe distance. Repeat, tactical withdrawal. Exercise parameters specified complete victory or surrender," the crystalline referee announced with mathematical precision. "Withdrawal does not satisfy termination conditions." So Young activated her communication system. Her voice carried across the system, calm and professional as always. "War Captain Thakron, this is Admiral So Young. We're prepared to accept your surrender at any time." The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Veltar could imagine the desperate discussions taking place on Council command ships as officers tried to understand how their overwhelming advantage had become a complete disaster. "Admiral So Young," Thakron finally replied, his voice carefully controlled. "The Galactic Council fleet surrenders." The silence that followed was deafening. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched as the most powerful military force in known space admitted defeat to a species that had been in space for less than a century. "Exercise terminated," announced the crystalline referee. Time elapsed 18 minutes 47 seconds. Victor. Human forces. Veltar slumped against the observation window. Around him, other observers stood in stunned silence. Some were already accessing their communication systems, sending urgent messages to their home governments. On the human flagship, So Young turned to her officers with a satisfied expression. "Good work, everyone. Namsik, please transmit our complete tactical analysis to the Council observers. I think they'll want to study our methods." As the human fleet began collecting disabled Council vessels for repair and rescue operations, Veltar realized that everything had changed. The exercise was supposed to put humanity in its place. Instead, it had demonstrated that humanity's place was at the top of the galactic military hierarchy, and they had made it look easy. The war games were over, but Veltar suspected that the real battle for the galaxy's future was just beginning. Veltar pressed his scaled hand against the cold metal of the observation deck window. Below him, the blue-green planet called Earth slowly turned in the darkness of space. He had watched over 200 worlds join the Galactic Council during his long career. Most species came begging for help, their eyes wide with fear and wonder. Others came with arrogance, thinking they could challenge the established order. All of them learned their place eventually, The humans were different. Admiral Kehoe stood straight and tall in the center of the council chamber. His dark hair was cut short and neat. His uniform bore no fancy decorations, just simple rank markings. Behind him, Chief Diplomat Soman held a datapad with steady hands. Neither of them seemed impressed by the massive chamber with its floating platforms and holographic displays. "Welcome to the Galactic Council," boomed War Captain Thakron of the Draknari Empire. His red scales gleamed under the chamber lights. "You are here because your species has achieved basic space travel. This gives you the right to request membership in our community." Kehoe nodded once. "We appreciate the invitation." Veltar noticed something in the human's voice. No trembling, no excitement. Just calm acceptance, as if this meeting was exactly what he had expected. "There are protocols to follow," continued High Merchant Ziltax of the Hegemony. His forearms gestured to floating screens showing trade agreements and defense pacts. "New species require guidance, protection. We offer both for a reasonable price." "What kind of price?" Soman asked. Her voice was quiet but clear. "Standard terms," Ziltax replied with what passed for a smile among his people. "Exclusive mining rights to your outer planets. Military bases for your protection. Cultural exchange programs to help you advance." Veltar had seen this conversation hundreds of times. The new species always agreed. They had no choice. The galaxy was dangerous and protection came with a cost. But Kehoe exchanged a quick glance with Somin. Something passed between them that Veltar couldn't quite read. "We'll need time to discuss these terms with our government," Kehoe said. Thakron's laugh was like rocks grinding together. "Your government? Human, you speak for a species that has barely left its own star system. Your largest ships would be nothing more than escape pods to us. Your weapons couldn't scratch our armor. What exactly does your government think it can negotiate?" The chamber fell silent. This was the moment when new species usually broke down. Some begged. Others tried to offer everything they had. A few became angry and stormed out, only to return days later with their pride swallowed. Kehoe smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't a nervous smile. It was the kind of smile that made Veltar's old instincts whisper warnings in his mind, the kind of smile his ancestors had learned to fear on their homeworld, back when they were still prey animals. "You're probably right," Kehoe said calmly. "Our technology is primitive compared to yours. Our ships are small. Our weapons are simple." He took a step forward. His posture never changed, but somehow he seemed larger than before. "But you know what we learned during our short history? Size doesn't always matter. Neither does advanced technology. What matters is how willing you are to use what you have." Captain Dongsu, who had been standing quietly behind the Admiral, moved slightly. Just a small shift in position. But Veltar noticed that he could now see every member of the council clearly. His eyes were calm and alert, like he was memorizing everything he saw. "Are you threatening us?" Thakron rose from his platform, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber. "Not at all," Kehoe replied. "I'm just making an observation. In our history, the biggest armies didn't always win. The most advanced weapons didn't guarantee victory. Often the winner was whoever wanted it more." Somin tapped her datapad. "We've studied your species' histories since we received your invitation." Very educational reading. Veltar felt his breath catch. They had studied council species. How much did they know? "The Draknari Empire," Somin continued, reading from her pad in the same calm voice. "Famous for your warrior culture. 11 major victories in the last century. All of them won through superior numbers and firepower against technologically inferior opponents." Thakron's scales began to darken with anger. "The hegemony," she continued. "Masters of economic warfare. You've never actually fought a major military campaign. You prefer to buy your victories through trade manipulation and debt." Ziltax's forearms began to twitch nervously. "The Ethereal Collective. Ancient and wise, but your last military action was over 300 years ago. You rely entirely on your reputation now." Elder Kothara of the Ethereal said nothing, but her glowing eyes dimmed slightly. Somin closed her datapad. "Very impressive records. But tell us, when was the last time any of you fought someone who actually wanted to fight back?" The silence in the chamber was deafening. Engineer Yu Jin, standing at the back of the human delegation, whispered something to Captain Dongsu. Veltar had excellent hearing, trained for intelligence gathering. He caught just a few words. Gravitational sensors, fleet positions, and 3 minutes. They weren't just studying council history. They were studying the Council's defenses. Right here. Right now. This meeting is over, Thakron declared. You will accept our terms or face the consequences. Kehoe nodded politely. We understand. But before we go, may I ask a question? The Draknari captain gestured impatiently. In all your histories and all your great victories, have you ever fought a species that treated war like a science? That studied their enemies not just to defeat them, but to understand them completely? Kehoe looked around the chamber, making eye contact with each council member. Because that's what humans do. We don't just fight. We learn, we adapt, we find weaknesses and exploit them, and we never, ever stop. He turned toward the exit, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. We know exactly where all your ships are positioned around our world. We know their capabilities, their weaknesses, and their crew rotations. If we wanted to, we could disable your entire fleet in under an hour using nothing but mining charges and precise gravitational calculations. The chamber erupted in angry voices, but Kehoe held up a hand. But we won't, because we're not here to make enemies. We're here to make friends. The question is, do you want us as friends, or would you prefer to find out what we're like as enemies? The human delegation walked out of the chamber in perfect formation, leaving behind a room full of very worried aliens. Veltar remained at his window long after the chamber had emptied. In the darkness beyond Earth, he could see the lights of the Council fleet. Hundreds of ships, representing the combined might of a dozen species. For the first time in his long career, he wondered if it would be enough. 6 months had passed since the humans had walked out of the Council chamber. Veltar found himself assigned to a mining colony on the edge of civilized space. The Council called it a promotion. He called it exile. His reports about the humans had made certain members very uncomfortable. The mining colony on Kepler 442b was supposed to be humanity's first test. The Council had decided to give them a simple task: help defend the mineral extraction operations from Void Raider attacks. It was a standard assignment for new species, dangerous enough to keep them busy, but manageable enough that they couldn't embarrass anyone important. Colonel Hansol arrived with a force of 300 humans. Veltar watched their transport ships land on the designated pad. The vessels were still primitive by galactic standards, but they were clean and well-maintained. The humans who emerged moved with discipline and purpose. Welcome to Kepler Station, announced Commander Vexira of the Stellar Peacekeepers. Her purple skin gleamed in the artificial light of the colony dome. We're glad to have your assistance with our little problem. Hansol saluted crisply. He was older than the admiral who had visited the Council, with gray showing in his black hair. Thank you, Commander. We're here to help. The Void Raiders hit us about once a week, explained Captain Morden of the Hegemony Defense Force. His mechanical voice came through translator units built into his armored suit. Usually at night, they take what they can and run before we can mount a proper response. Sergeant Major Boram, standing behind Hansol, tilted her head slightly. How long have these attacks been going on? About 8 months, Vexira replied. We lose maybe 10% of our weekly output to them. It's acceptable losses according to the insurance calculations. Acceptable? Lieutenant Commander Jiwoo stepped forward. She was young, probably new to command, but her eyes were sharp. You're telling us that you've been getting robbed every week for 8 months and you think that's acceptable? Morden's translated voice carried what might have been amusement. Young human, this is how frontier mining works. The raiders come, we fight them off, they retreat. Everyone understands the rules. No one gets hurt too badly and business continues. Veltar watched Jiwoo's face carefully. He had learned to read human expressions during his months of study. The slight tightening around her eyes suggested she found this explanation less than satisfactory. Where do they come from? Boram asked. Unknown, Vexira admitted. Somewhere in the asteroid field beyond the third moon. But it's too big to search effectively. How many ships do they usually bring? Hansol asked. 5 or 6 light raiders, fast ships with moderate firepower. What time do they usually attack? Between midnight and 0300 local time. Hansol exchanged a look with his officers. Again, Veltar noticed that silent communication that seemed to pass between humans without words. We'll need to see your defense records, Hansol said. Sensor logs, damage reports, tactical analyses. Of course, Vexira replied. Though I should warn you, we've had military advisors from the Draknari and the Ethereals review our situation. They all agreed that we're handling it as well as can be expected. That night, Veltar found the human officers gathered in their temporary command center. They had spread out holographic displays showing the colony's layout, surrounding space, and months of sensor data. Captain Dong-Su was studying attack patterns with an intensity that made Veltar uncomfortable. The human stared at the data like he was trying to see through it to something hidden underneath. They always come from the same general direction, Dong-Su observed, northwest quadrant of the asteroid field. But never the exact same route, added Major Taemin, pointing at different colored lines on the display. They vary their approach by about 15 degrees each time. Smart, said Jiwoo. Makes it harder to predict exactly where they'll emerge from the field. Lieutenant Captain Subin looked up from another display. What about timing? They hit between midnight and 0300, but is there a pattern within that window? Borum pulled up a different chart. Look at this. They always attack during the colony's minimum power cycle. That's when the long-range sensors are running on reduced capacity. They're not just raiders, Hansol said quietly. They're reconnaissance specialists. They know exactly when we're weakest. Veltar realized he was witnessing something the galaxy's other military forces had missed. The humans weren't just reviewing the data to prepare defenses. They were profiling their enemy like scientists studying a new species. How long would it take to map the asteroid field? Asked Engineer Yujin. With our equipment? Maybe 3 weeks, replied Lieutenant Miran. But that's assuming we use active scanning. The raiders would detect us immediately. What about passive scanning? Subin suggested. Track their engine signatures as they move through the field? Possible, Yujin nodded. But we'd need to position sensors at multiple points around the field perimeter. Do it, Hansol ordered. And I want round-the-clock monitoring of all communications in this system. If these raiders are getting inside information about our patrol schedules and power cycles, someone's feeding it to them. Over the next 2 weeks, Veltar watched the humans work with a precision that amazed him. They didn't just prepare for the next attack. They studied everything. They analyzed the colony's daily routines, mapped the asteroid field, monitored communications, and built detailed profiles of every ship that had passed through the system in the past year. When the raiders finally came, the humans were ready. It started like every other attack. 6 raider ships emerged from the asteroid field at 01:30 local time, moving fast toward the mining platforms. The colony's defense ships moved to intercept, following standard protocols. But this time, 3 human ships were waiting in the shadows behind the largest mining platform. As soon as the raiders committed to their attack run, the humans struck from behind. The battle was over in 12 minutes. 5 raider ships were destroyed. The 6th was captured intact, but that wasn't the end. Within hours, Hansol's forces had extracted the location of the raider base from the captured ship's navigation computer. By dawn, a combined human colonial force was moving through the asteroid field toward coordinates that had remained hidden for 8 months. Veltar joined the assault force as an observer. He watched through the transport's viewports as they approached a hidden facility, built into a hollowed-out asteroid. It was larger than anyone had expected. This wasn't just a raider base. It was a major staging area for operations throughout the sector. How many raiders are we talking about? Asked Commander Vexira over the communications channel. Passive scans show maybe 200 personnel, replied Major Yunji from the lead human ship. 30 combat vessels of various classes. We should call for reinforcements, Vexira said. This is bigger than we planned for. Negative, Hansol replied calmly. We have sufficient force for the mission. Veltar did the math in his head. The humans had brought 60 combat troops and 4 small ships. The raiders outnumbered them more than 3 to 1. The attack began at noon. What followed was unlike any military operation Veltar had ever witnessed. The humans didn't just assault the base, they systematically dismantled it. They used the asteroid field itself as cover and concealment, turning the raiders' own defensive positions against them. They cut off escape routes, disabled communications, and isolated different sections of the base before attacking each one separately. Commander Jae-sung led a boarding party that captured the main power generator. Lieutenant Hyunwoo's team seized the docking bays, trapping the raider ships. Captain Dawen coordinated simultaneous strikes on weapon positions and command centers. In 6 hours, it was over. The raider base was completely destroyed, their fleet captured or eliminated, and their leadership dead or in custody. But the humans weren't finished. Over the next week, They used information captured from the base to track down 3 more raider outposts in nearby systems. Each attack was faster and more efficient than the last. The humans were learning, adapting, becoming more dangerous with each victory. Veltar sent his report to the council with hands that trembled slightly as he typed. The humans do not fight like any species we have encountered. They do not simply react to threats. They study them, understand them, and then eliminate them completely. What should have been a simple defensive mission became a sector-wide military campaign that ended 8 months of raider activity in 1 week. He paused in his writing, looking out at the now peaceful space around the mining colony. Recommendation: the Council should seriously reconsider its approach to human integration. These beings are not another minor species seeking protection. They are something else entirely. As he transmitted his report, Veltar wondered if anyone would listen, or if they would simply dismiss his warnings like they had the last time. In the distance, he could see human patrol ships maintaining perfect formation as they guarded the space lanes. For the first time in 8 months, the miners could work without fear. The humans had done in 1 week what the galaxy's finest military advisors had said was impossible, and they had made it look easy. News traveled fast through the galactic networks. What the humans had done at Kepler Station couldn't be ignored or dismissed anymore. Veltar watched the reports flood in from across the galaxy. Military academies were studying the tactical recordings. Defense contractors were analyzing human ship designs. Even civilian news networks were running stories about the Terran solution to the raider problem. The Draknari Empire was not amused. War Captain Thakron stood before the council assembly, his red scales darker than usual with anger. These humans destroyed an entire raider network in 1 week, a network that had been operating successfully for over a year. They eliminated threats that we considered manageable and profitable. High Merchant Ziltax shifted nervously on his platform. The raiders were paying protection fees to several hegemony shipping companies. Their elimination has disrupted established business relationships. More concerning, added Elder Kothara of the Ethereals, is their methodology. They don't simply defeat enemies. They study them like specimens, then eliminate them completely. Veltar had been called back to give his report in person. He stood in the center of the chamber, feeling very small under the weight of so many hostile stares. Observer Veltar, Thakron rumbled. Your report suggests these humans represent some kind of unprecedented threat. Yet they number only a few billion on a single world. Explain how this is possible. Veltar cleared his throat carefully. Honored War Captain, it's not about their numbers. It's about their approach to conflict. Every other species we've encountered treats war as either a test of strength, a business opportunity, or a last resort. Humans treat it as a science. Science? Kothara's glowing eyes brightened with interest. They analyze everything, not just enemy positions and capabilities, but psychology, behavior patterns, logistical chains, communication networks. They don't just ask how to defeat an enemy. They ask why the enemy exists in the first place, and then they eliminate the root cause. Ziltax made a dismissive gesture with 2 of his arms. Impressive for dealing with raiders, perhaps, but hardly a threat to established galactic powers. That's what I thought too, Veltar admitted, until I saw their training records. He activated a holographic display showing data he had managed to copy from human databases during his time at Kepler Station. This is from their military academy on Earth. They don't just study their own tactics. They study ours. All of ours. They have detailed analyses of every major military campaign fought by every council species for the past 500 years. The chamber fell silent. More than that, Veltar continued, they've identified patterns, weaknesses, blind spots in our thinking that we don't even know we have. Thakron leaned forward on his platform. You're suggesting they're planning to attack us? I'm suggesting they're planning for every possibility, including war with the entire council. Another silence, longer and heavier than the first. Bring them in, Thakron decided. We'll settle this once and for all. Issue a formal challenge for military exercises. It's time to show these humans their proper place in the galactic order. 3 days later, Admiral So Young received the Council's official invitation to participate in joint training exercises in the Zirian system. The message was polite, but the meaning was clear. This was a test of force. Veltar was present when So Young discussed the invitation with her staff aboard the human flagship. The ship was smaller than most Council vessels, but everything was clean, efficient, and purpose-built. "It's obviously a trap," said Commander Namsik, studying the exercise parameters on his display. 12-to-1 odds. "We're supposed to defend a fixed position against overwhelming force." "Standard humiliation scenario," agreed General He-Jin. "They expect us to last maybe an hour before surrendering." So Young smiled the same cold smile that Veltar had seen on Admiral Kehoe's face months earlier. "How long do we actually need to win?" she asked. The question caught Veltar off guard. "Win? Against 12 Council fleets?" "Define win," Namsik replied carefully. "Complete destruction or surrender of all attacking forces." Admiral Young-ho pulled up tactical displays showing the Zirian asteroid field where the exercises would take place. "Under normal circumstances? Against this many ships, maybe 3 days if we had perfect conditions and unlimited ammunition." "We won't have unlimited ammunition," Captain Subin pointed out. "Exercise rules limit us to standard loadouts." "Then we'll have to be creative," So Young decided. "Namsik, I want you to run probability simulations. Assume we have to win in under 12 hours using only what we can carry." "That's impossible," Commander Taman said flatly. "Is it?" Young-ho was studying the asteroid field data with the same intensity Veltar had seen in other humans. "What if we don't fight the way they expect?" Captain Hyunwoo looked up from his engineering station. "The exercise rules say we can't damage the asteroids, but they don't say anything about moving them." "Moving asteroids?" Veltar asked. "How is that possible?" Major Yunji answered without looking up from her calculations. "Controlled explosions. Use the asteroid mass as kinetic weapons. Very simple physics. But the calculations required," Veltar started, "are well within our capabilities," Young-ho finished. "We've been mapping gravitational interactions since we first reached space. It's necessary for safe interplanetary travel." So Young turned to Namsik. "Run those simulations. I want to know if this is feasible." "Already on it," Namsik replied. His fingers danced over his control interface. Preliminary results suggest this could actually work. Over the next week, Veltar watched the humans prepare for what everyone expected to be their humiliating defeat. But their preparations didn't look like those of a desperate force facing impossible odds. They looked like scientists getting ready for a very interesting experiment. Captain Miran's engineers worked around the clock modifying mining charges for precise detonation timing. Lieutenant Commander Jiwoo's intelligence team built detailed psychological profiles of every council commander who would be participating. Commander Jae Sung's tactical specialists ran hundreds of combat simulations, each one testing a different approach to the same basic strategy. "What exactly are you planning?" Veltar finally asked So Young during one of their briefings. She looked at him with those calm, analytical eyes that he had learned to fear. "We're going to give the council exactly what they want," she said. "A demonstration of military capability. The question is whether they'll survive it." The war games were scheduled to begin in 6 days. Representatives from dozens of species were traveling to Zirion to watch humanity's inevitable defeat. Military observers, news reporters, and diplomatic officials all wanted to see the humans brought down to size. Veltar sent his final report before the exercises began. The humans are not preparing for a defensive battle. They are preparing for something else entirely. Their confidence suggests they believe they can win against impossible odds. Given what I have observed of their capabilities, I recommend the Council take this possibility seriously. As he transmitted the message, Veltar wondered if anyone would read it before the exercises began, or if they would dismiss it like all his other warnings. Outside his quarters viewport, he could see the Council fleet assembling. Hundreds of ships representing the combined military might of a dozen species. Enough firepower to destroy entire star systems. Against them, a single human fleet of 30 vessels. Any rational observer would call it murder. But Veltar had learned not to underestimate the humans. They didn't fight rationally. They fought scientifically. And science, he was beginning to understand, was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined.